Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at U.S.-China relations.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and trying to unpack what makes this relationship tick
Right.
and why it matters so much for all of us. But
Yeah.
hold on tight because we're starting with a pretty unusual source.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at a 2017 episode of The Alex Jones Show.
The Alex Jones Show. Okay, so we're diving into the deep end of the pool here, aren't we?
Yeah, you could definitely say that now
Okay.
before anyone hits the skip button.
Sure.
Let me be clear. We're not here to endorse Alex Jones's views,
Of course, of course.
but we think that even controversial sources can give us some valuable insights.
Right.
And then so we're kind of using this episode as a cultural barometer.
I guess
It's
so.
like a snapshot of certain anxieties and worldviews that were circulating at the time.
A window into a particular mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to understand how certain narratives take hold and what makes them resonate with people. So let's dive into this Alex Jones episode and see what we can glean from it.
Okay, let's do it.
One of the first things that jumps out is his portrayal of China. He
Oh, yeah.
he paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't he?
He certainly does.
Mm.
Jones consistently describes China as being out of control, a communist power trip bent on world domination.
Right.
He points to their actions in the South China Sea, their military buildup,
Mm.
and even their economic policies as evidence of this.
Yeah, and he's not exactly subtle about it either.
No, none at all.
He uses a lot of inflammatory language, talking about China stealing jobs, threatening nuclear war,
Right.
and basically being a menace to global stability.
It's important to remember, though, that Jones is a master of hyperbole.
Yeah.
He's playing to his audience's fears and anxieties,
Mm-hmm.
using very emotionally charged language to paint a very black and white picture of the world.
Yeah, for sure. But even if we take Jones's rhetoric with a huge grain of salt,
Right.
there are some underlying concerns there that we can't just ignore, right?
Absolutely.
The South China Sea, for instance, is a real flashpoint.
Yeah.
China has been building artificial islands and claiming territory there,
Right.
which has led to tensions with neighboring countries and the U.S.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The South China Sea is a strategically important waterway,
Yeah.
and China's assertive actions there
Mm-hmm.
have raised legitimate concerns about their intentions.
Right.
They're flexing their military muscles, trying to assert dominance in the region.
Mm.
And that's understandably unsettling for other countries, including the U.S. To give you a clearer picture,
Okay.
China's claims in the South China Sea encompass almost the entire area, overlapping with claims from Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia,
Wow.
Brunei, and Taiwan.
Okay.
This has led to territorial disputes and incidents at sea,
Yeah.
with China often accused of using its coast guard and fishing vessels to harass other countries' vessels.
It's a complex situation with historical claims, economic interests, and national pride all tangled up together.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect example of how those larger geopolitical tensions can play out in very concrete ways with
Absolutely.
real world consequences.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's not just abstract geopolitical maneuvering.
Yeah.
It's about access to shipping lanes, fishing rights,
Yeah.
and potential energy resources.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have multiple countries with overlapping claims,
Right.
each backed by their own military forces, the potential for miscalculation and conflict is always there.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
And Jones, in his own way, is tapping into that sense of unease, that fear of things spiraling out of control.
He's a master at stoking those fears, even if he often distorts the facts or presents a very simplified version of reality.
Yeah, for sure. And he doesn't stop at China.
Yeah.
She also drags North Korea into the mix,
Right.
lumping them together as part of this axis of evil that's threatening the world.
Right.
He mentions North Korea's human rights record, their nuclear ambitions, and the constant threat they pose to South Korea. It's interesting how he connects those two countries, China and North Korea, creating this narrative of a unified threat.
He's building a narrative of an us versus them scenario with the U.S. and its allies on one side,
Yeah.
and these rogue states, as he calls them, on the other. It's a very simplistic and divisive framing,
Yeah.
but it's effective in stirring up fear and anxiety.
And let's not forget the nuclear element. Jones is constantly warning about the threat of nuclear war,
Yeah.
claiming that we're in the most danger the world has ever been in.
Right.
He cites every top analyst and the Pentagon as backing up his claims.
Again, we need to be careful about taking his claims at face value.
Mm,
While the threat of nuclear war is unfortunately never off the table,
right.
the situation is far more nuanced than Jones portrays it. There are systems in place to prevent accidental launches,
Okay.
communication channels to de-escalate tensions, and a general understanding among nuclear-armed states that a nuclear war would be catastrophic for everyone involved.
So it's not quite the hair trigger scenario that Jones makes it seem.
Not exactly.
Yeah.
While the risk is always there,
Yeah.
the idea that we're on the verge of nuclear annihilation is simply not supported by the facts.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we should be complacent. The potential consequences of a nuclear conflict are so dire
Yeah.
that even a small miscalculation could have devastating consequences.
It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
Acknowledging the very real risks while also avoiding unnecessary panic.
Precisely. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Mm.
We need to be able to evaluate information from all sources,
Okay.
including those we might disagree with, and separate fact from hyperbole.
Because how do we do that? How do we navigate this information landscape where inflammatory rhetoric and genuine concerns are often intertwined?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll be exploring more detail throughout this deep dive. It's about developing a healthy skepticism, learning to identify bias, and seeking out multiple perspectives.
So we're starting with Alex Jones, but we're not ending there. We're going to be digging deeper, exploring the complexities of U.S.-China relations and understanding how these global dynamics affect all of us. Stick with us. It's going to be a fascinating journey.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Alex Jones and his take on U.S.-China relations.
Oh, yeah. His pretty dramatic take.
Right, which is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Now let's zoom out a bit and consider the bigger picture. What are some of the trends we should be paying attention to when it comes to these two global powerhouses?
Okay, help me understand this. It often feels like we're teetering on the edge of a new Cold War with all the talk of rivalry and potential conflict.
Right.
Is that really where we're headed?
Well, it's not quite as simple as a Cold War redux.
Okay.
The world has changed dramatically since the days of the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Right.
We're far more interconnected now, economically and technologically. But there's no denying that we're witnessing a significant power shift.
Okay.
For decades, the U.S. has been the dominant global player,
Yeah.
setting the rules of the game.
Right.
But China's rapid economic growth and increasing military capabilities are challenging that dominance.
So it's like the established leader facing a rising challenger.
Exactly.
That's bound to create some tension, right?
Exactly. China's rise is shaking up the existing world order, creating uncertainty and anxiety among other countries.
Right.
Some nations are aligning themselves more closely with China, drawn to its economic clout and alternative development models. Others are trying to maintain a careful balance,
Right.
not wanting to pick sides in this emerging rivalry.
So it's not just about the U.S. and China.
Yeah,
It's a global game of chess with everyone trying to figure out their next move.
it is.
But let's focus on the main players for a moment. What are some of the key flashpoints or areas of contention between the U.S. and China?
Well, we've already talked about the South China Sea, which is a major source of tension. Then there's Taiwan,
Right.
which China considers a breakaway province
Right.
that must eventually be reunited with the mainland. The U.S., on the other hand, has a long-standing policy of supporting Taiwan's autonomy,
Right.
which China views as a direct challenge to its sovereignty.
So Taiwan is a potential powder keg.
It could be.
What about the economic front? We often hear about trade wars and intellectual property theft.
Right.
How much of that is real and how much is just political rhetoric?
The economic relationship between the U.S. and China is incredibly complex and deeply intertwined. They're both major trading partners, but there's also a lot of competition, particularly in areas like technology and innovation.
Right.
The U.S. has accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and forced technology transfer. These are legitimate concerns,
Yeah.
and they've led to trade disputes and tariffs.
So that new phone you're thinking of buying, it might be more expensive because of a trade war sparked by these tensions.
It's possible.
It's not just some abstract political game. It can hit you right in the wallet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just consumer goods. This competition is playing out in cutting-edge fields, like artificial intelligence, 5G networks,
Right.
and quantum computing. The outcome of this technological race will have huge implications for the global economy, military power, and even the way we live our lives.
It feels like we're standing at a crossroads. Which path will we choose? Will it be a path of confrontation and conflict or one of cooperation and coexistence?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer. There are powerful forces on both sides pushing for a more confrontational approach. But there are also voices calling for dialogue, diplomacy, and finding common ground. The future is not predetermined. It depends on the choices we make, both as individuals and as nations.
So what are some of the potential scenarios that could play out? We've already talked about the possibility of a new Cold War. Are there other possibilities, maybe some that are a bit more optimistic?
Well, one possibility is a scenario of managed competition. This would involve the U.S. and China finding ways to cooperate on certain issues, like climate change or global health, while still competing fiercely in other areas, such as technology and trade. Think of it as a kind of competitive coexistence.
It's like frenemies. They can work together when it's in their mutual interest, but they're still rivals at heart.
That's a good analogy. This scenario would require a lot of careful diplomacy and a willingness to compromise on both sides. But it could potentially lead to a more stable and predictable world order.
Managed competition. What else is on the table? Is there any chance of a more genuinely collaborative relationship emerging between the U.S. and China?
It's certainly possible, though it would require a significant shift in mindset on both sides. They would need to recognize that global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation require collective action. It would also require strong leadership and a willingness to put aside short-term national interests for the sake of the greater good.
That sounds pretty idealistic in the current climate. But hey, it's good to dream big, right?
Sure.
What about the opposite end of the spectrum? How real is the risk of actual military conflict between the U.S. and China?
The risk of conflict, particularly in flashpoint areas like the South China Sea or Taiwan, is a serious concern. Miscalculations, accidents, or even deliberate provocations could escalate tensions and lead to unintended consequences. The consequences of such a conflict would be catastrophic, not just for the U.S. and China, but for the entire world.
That's a chilling thought. It's like we're walking a tightrope with the potential for things to go very wrong at any moment. What can be done to mitigate that risk and prevent things from spiraling out of control?
Diplomacy, open communication.
And building trust are essential. Both sides need to engage in dialogue, understand each other's perspectives, and find areas of common ground. They also need to establish clear red lines and mechanisms for de-escalation to prevent misunderstandings and manage potential crises.
It's about setting up guardrails to prevent things from going off the rails. But what about the role of other countries in all of this? Are they just bystanders? Or can they play a more active role in shaping the outcome?
Other countries have a crucial role to play. They can act as mediators, facilitators of dialogue, and voices of reason. They can choose to align themselves with one side or the other, or try to maintain neutrality, which can impact the balance of power and influence the dynamics of the rivalry. For instance, countries in Southeast Asia are particularly caught in the middle, trying to balance their economic ties with China with their security concerns and historical relationships with the U.S. So it's a complex web of relationships and interests, with everyone trying to navigate this shifting geopolitical landscape. But with all this uncertainty, what are we as individuals supposed to do? How can we make sense of this complex world and find our own footing?
That's where critical thinking comes in. It's about staying informed, engaging with diverse perspectives, and challenging our own assumptions. Don't rely on a single news source or echo chamber. Seek out different viewpoints, even those you might disagree with, and try to understand the underlying motivations and perspectives.
So it's about becoming informed citizens, not just passive consumers of news. It's about recognizing that the world is a messy, complicated place with no easy answers. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Alex Jones's provocative claims to the complex realities of U.S.-China relations.
We have.
It's clear that this is a topic that deserves our attention and our critical thinking skills.
Absolutely. And we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these global dynamics directly impact your life in ways you might not even realize, So stay tuned. There's much more to uncover.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring this really complex relationship between the U.S. and China.
Yeah.
From unsettling rhetoric for the very real risks of conflict.
Right.
But now let's bring it home.
Yeah.
How do these global power dynamics, the ones that are, playing out on the world stage, how do they actually affect your life?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? It's easy to think that these geopolitical issues are happening somewhere else.
Yeah. Right.
Disconnected from our daily routines.
Yeah.
But the reality is those global ripples create waves that crash right into our lives.
Right.
Often in ways we don't even recognize.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Give me some concrete examples. Make this real for our listener.
Well, let's start with something everyone can relate to, the stuff we buy.
Okay.
The trade relationship between the U.S. and China has a huge impact on the prices of goods. From your clothes and electronics to the food on your table.
Okay.
Remember those trade wars we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those tariffs and disputes can really drive up prices.
Right.
Making everything more expensive. From that new phone you're eyeing to your weekly groceries.
So that great deal I snagged online might actually be a side effect of global tensions.
It's possible.
I never thought of it that way.
It's all connected.
Right.
And it's not just about consumer goods. Think about jobs.
Okay.
Manufacturing jobs have been shifting to China for decades.
Right.
Which has had a huge impact on local economies and communities around the world.
Yeah.
And as China moves up the value chain, competing in high-tech industries, the competition for jobs and innovation intensifies, affecting career paths and opportunities for everyone.
It's like this competition is playing out in our shopping carts, in our workplaces. What about the information we consume?
Oh, that's a good one.
How does this rivalry shape what we see and hear online?
That's a critical point. The rise of social media and online platforms has created a whole new battleground for influence and propaganda.
Wow.
Both the U.S. and China are actively engaged in shaping narratives and influencing public opinion through these channels. You might see certain news stories amplified, certain viewpoints suppressed, or even encounter targeted disinformation campaigns designed to sow discord and manipulate perceptions.
It's like an information arms race, with truth and accuracy often becoming casualties. So how do we protect ourselves?
Right.
How do we become more discerning consumers of information in this age of digital manipulation?
That's where critical thinking becomes your most valuable asset. It's about questioning everything you see and hear online.
Okay.
Especially if it confirms your existing biases.
Right.
Or triggers strong emotional reactions. Look for evidence. Consider the source.
Right.
And seek out multiple perspectives before forming your own opinion.
So it's not just about what we think, but how we think. But it's easy to feel powerless in the face of these massive global forces.
Right.
Is there anything we can actually do to influence these dynamics? Or are we just along for the ride?
You're not powerless. Remember, individual actions, when multiplied by millions, can create a powerful force for change.
Okay.
You can start by educating yourself about these issues, engaging in constructive dialogue and demanding transparency and accountability from your leaders.
Okay.
Support organizations that promote peace and understanding and advocate for policies that prioritize diplomacy and cooperation over confrontation.
So it's about using our voices, our votes, and our choices to shape the world we want to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might feel like a small cog in a giant machine.
Yeah.
But your choices matter.
Yeah.
The food you buy, the companies you support, the information you share, it all contributes to the larger tapestry. And by making informed choices, you can help shift the balance towards a more peaceful, equitable, and sustainable world.
That's a message of empowerment I think our listeners will appreciate.
I hope so.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the unsettling rhetoric of Alex Jones to the complex realities of U.S.-China relations and their impact on our daily lives. It's a lot to process, but hopefully it's left you feeling more informed, more engaged, and more empowered to navigate this ever-changing world.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to make the world a little bit better, one informed choice at a time.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and keep connecting.